just now I thought I was saying, welcome to the conference, and now I'm saying, well, we are at our last and final session of the conference, but it is a very interesting session. So the title is Multiple Goals and Aspiration Levels. Of course, the decision-making implications of multiple goals and aspirations is one of the more interesting and a core area of behavioral theory of the firm. We know that it is very rich conceptually and in need of, I think, more empirical work. So very excited that we have three speakers today who are actually looking at this issue and are going to talk about their work and share it with us. We'll go in the same order as in the agenda. So it would be Evangelos first, then Cyndi, and then Scott. Each of you have about 10 minutes to share your work with us. And as usual, please post your questions on the Poll Everywhere link, and then I'll monitor those questions and we'll have a discussion around those questions towards after the presentations, and we'll try to wrap this up around 11:50 Eastern Standard Time, leaving last 10 minutes just for some closing comments and so on. Okay, so Evangelos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share. I cannot share the screen.
Felipe, do you?
Just 1 second. Yeah, so
yeah.
Make co-host. You should be able to do it now, Evangelos.
Okay, great. So today I will speak about a paper that we have with Thomas Keil, Konstantinos, Kostopoulos, Felix, Meissner, and Pino, Audia, regarding this issue with multiple goals. And to give you the story that we have so far in a nutshell, is mainly this which we were talking about, is together with all these colleagues, was that the relationship between performance feedback and search intensity is something that it has been done several times. But in general, and not only about multiple goals, there is a lack of attention on a very equal important dimension of search, which is the locus of search, where you search. For example, and where we mainly focus, search for solutions that occur internally or solutions that are external, thinking solutions that draw on resources located outside the organization. Okay, so we mainly start thinking about this and checking this locus of search, and actually locus of search becomes more important if you give these multiple goals perspective. Why? Because actually multiple goals most of the times mean different reactions, different search intensities in different perspectives, in different directions. Okay, and our study, this which mainly does is to examine whether and how, or not how, sorry, when the performance on multiple goals, especially in cases where these are not in the same direction, and not from in the same hierarchy of goals, if you want, increase firms' propensity to search internally, meaning locus of search. So there are mainly three hypotheses in our model. The first one is that actually in the simple, which, as we said, still has a meaning to test the simple goal where you have a primary goal that you receive a performance feedback from this goal, and this is below your aspirations. This may lead to shift the locus of search towards external sets. Why? First of all, because the decision makers are willing to take more risks based on that. Also, they might question their ability to the organization, to the internal organization to solve problems. So they check externally. And finally, because with that way, they can expand and acquire resources and find solutions that actually they might lack. And that's why they have a bad performance. So that's our first hypothesis. Then we add the multiple goals perspective by saying, okay, you have one goal that you prefer, you perform not well, the primary goal, but if you perform to a secondary goal better than your aspirations, what will happen? And we believe that in these cases, you will shift your locus of search towards internal search based on the self-enhancement theory. Why? Because the goals will diminish this multiple goals configuration will diminish the influence of low performance primary goal by giving emphasis to the secondary goal as self-enhancement will predict. And but our story does not stop here. We mainly say that beyond this, there might be some situational factors outside, within the organization, but a little bit outside the decision making that might affect this. And mainly this, which we argue, is that the higher the power of the organizational unit, the stronger the shift that will happen to internal goals. Why? Because the high power mainly provides a greater latitude to choose the response to the multiple goals that you want, because you have more power. And this which you want is to protect your self-image, and you will mainly focus internally even more. So we test that in a setting that we think that it is very, very good for this kind of tests in the global pharmaceutical industry, and mainly in the clinical trials, where there is a very clear distinction between primary and secondary goals. We have 97 global manufacturing, global pharmaceutical companies from 93 to 2013, not 20,000 years from now. That's wrong there. And mainly this which we test is the goals that are from the early stage, meaning preclinical and phase 1, as a secondary goal, and the numbers of the drug candidates passing in the late stage, that it's phase 2 and phase 3. These two, to give you here why we split like this, they have a completely different perspective. The first two is mainly about toxicity and how much the drug has it's toxic. The other, and which is the main primary incentive that the firms have, because that's what they care about, to have them in the market, is mainly about how much these are productive to protect against some the effectiveness of the drug, the active ingredients to protect against the disease that they try to treat. So mainly our hypotheses are supported. So the primary goal, performance on the primary goal, that it is low, this will make the organizations to become to check more the external search rather than internal search, and the inconsistency between primary and secondary goal, where secondary goal is above and primary is below aspirations, then the decision makers decrease external search by focusing on the internal search. And also we found the support for the third hypothesis, where a higher power of the organizational unit measured as the scientists in our case, because we speak about that how many scientists, the full-time scientists that the company has. So the stronger is the shift from when you have an inconsistent feedback to locus of search towards internal search. So our humble contributions to the literature, as we see it, is that first of all, we saw that the locus of search really has an effect, and it's important to test. Also, we add to the research of on self-enhancement learning by arguing and finding that the self-enhancement actually may help to explain not only why probabilistic search stops, but also the direction of search. And the last one, that actually this theory that we try to develop mainly help to respond and understand how the operational level goals act, and especially in some in the presence of some situational contingencies in the form of power of the decision maker that they have. I don't know how much time I made it. I think I made it on time.
You did. Thank you.
I just to mention also that I was tested positive in COVID yesterday, and that's why my voice is like this. And that's also a disclaimer. The paper is really nice. That's all blame to me.
Yeah. Thank you, Evangelos, and I hope you're feeling okay. All right, so thank you for the presentation. We have a couple of questions. We have a question for you, which I'll ask later. Let's go to our next speaker, and that's Cyndi. Cyndi, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, let me share screen. Can you see?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so first of all, thank the organizer for having us to present this work. And we definitely feel the multiple goal session is the right home for this work. And first of all, let's see what Sarah and Marta has talked about multiple goals. So they said organization pursue multiple goals that are not necessarily always consistent with each other, right? And they don't have to be always aligned. They are often pursued by not the same part of organization or not even at the same time. And I found this quote below that I think perfectly illustrates this perspective of theirs, saying that the goals oftentimes don't align with each other. And so that's kind of the background motivation for study. a bit history back then, right? So when like a lot of empirical work in BTF, like particularly pick maybe one goal and then assess aspiration of that goal, and then the comparison produce performance feedback to trigger certain actions to meet that goal. And fast forward to today, when we talk about multiple goal studies, and we also have this like very similar kind of template where we look at goal 1, goal 2, right? 2 different goals, and different goal will have a different type of aspiration on each one of them. And then we have performance feedback on each one of them as well. And then these jointly will lead to some sort of action. And given the context, we are also able to provide some sort of priority order of the goals. And I think the previous presentation is actually a perfect illustration of this kind of structure. But for us, we notice, right, given the structure, a lot of the mechanism of how the goal works on driving organizational actions are all still on aspirations, right? And they are all on the very situational and very often annually updated kinds of aspiration and performance. Some are even within shorter interval, right? So that got us thinking. So basically, all the empirical focus so far are on goals that are directed by aspiration, and they are short-term oriented adaptation to what they got from the information from the performance feedback. And they are mostly meant for fixing problems detected by this backward-looking performance feedback mechanism. But isn't there any other type of goals that also drive form outputs, right? Are all the goals really here to set to fix problems only? So then we realized the literature has already reminded us that the guarantee 11th of 2000, right? There's not only a backward-looking mechanism when we think about organization behavior driven by goals. There's also this forward-looking form of intelligence that is not the same, right? It's supposed not to follow the performance of feedback.
Cyndi, just your microphone is not always clear, so your voice is loud and then it becomes soft.
Okay, is it better now? Maybe
yes.
I try to sit closer, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so back to here where we say, yeah, so we realize there's, they propose there should be different mechanisms rather than backward-looking performance feedback. Okay, so that motivate us to think about goals that do not have to adapt to performance feedback, and they aim for long-term oriented gain, and they're not set to fix immediate problems either. And what about those goals that were set to actually achieve a firm's strategy, right? So in a way, our panels also mentioned the connection to strategy for our theory. So that's exactly part of our motivation as well. So we all know what strategy is, and we want to look at strategic goals. Strategic goals, when firms create those, they already come up with a more concrete plan on course of actions, what is their intended end game of their business effort, and they can be very explicit about it. Like, this is what we're trying to do, this is what we try to accomplish, and how we are going to do it. And these goals, you know, for example, like what kind of growth, is it geographical or is it industrial? What kind of positioning or even new innovation directions? These are all kind of strategic goals. And firms generally have a strategy and have a set of strategic goals for them to, you know, to guide them forward. And once they announce these goals internally and externally, it will trigger a stronger commitment for them to actually do them, right? To invest resources on accomplishing these goals. And it's in line with what the 2000 paper talks about, the greater fidelity in the anticipated linkage between a desired achievement and act in the pursuit that can result more dedicated efforts. So which means if they claims what they're going to do, and if it makes sense, and they are going to do it, right? They're more likely to do it. So the more detailed, the more concrete information about their future strategic goal is disclosed, the lesser flexibility, lesser leeway that managers will deviate from those goals, right? So they will do it. And it would be nice if we can empirically examine the entire strategy, but it is really hard. So we kind of can only focus on one particular goal. So we chose market expansion as the focal strategic goal, because we think it definitely requires a lot of risk-taking investment along the dimension of, long-term borrowing, capital expenditure, and R&D, etc. So our first main effect we want to establish is about the firm's commitment to the strategic goal is positively related to their risk-taking. Okay, so we are saying that firms are supposed to follow their designated path of a certain strategy, but performance feedback keeps coming out, right? They keeps coming up and they start to interfere with firms' decisions. And they are inconsistent noise for firms because sometimes they're above, sometimes they're below. And you have to deal with them at the same time, even you have a strategy of what you are supposed to focus on now. And will such interference or, let's say, distraction really make firms deviate from their forward-looking strategic goal then? So we split the scenario, right? So if, let's say, performance is way below the aspiration, remember, decision makers are very myopic, bounded rational. They focus more on immediate issue and they devalue the future gain. And so performance feedback, first of all, is very tangible, quantifiable. It creates very immediate pressure. It's aligned with KPI design, right? It fits their incentives, like because performance managers are evaluated by their performance. So it's more consequential for their career and their compensations. And also, if we think about hyperbolic discounting or exponential discounting theory in economics, we are present biased anyway, right? So we are likely to pay for short-term rewards, discount the future payoffs. And also at the same time, if you start to deal with very serious performance issue, a large inflow of decisions and the urgent requests for you will slow down the decision-making process, will conflict your decision as well. So overall, we think if you get a very strong negative feedback, it will weaken this positive relationship of your commitment to your strategic goal to your risk-taking. Okay, so the other situation will be you perform way above, but it's the same bounded rational manager, right? Same manager that will devalue the future. And now they are happy, they're satisfied, they are even less willing to take any risk. And because this mentality, right, what we have been doing is clearly working, why change? So, and prospect theory also talks a lot about how we have such a low tolerance for risk in a gain situation like this, right? So, and hyperbolic discounting and exponential discounting again, right? So future payoff is even more devalued if you are already in the doing very well present situation. So it seems a stronger performance, positive feedback will also weaken your strategic goals, commitment to goals into relationship to risk taking. So to summarize, we say firms have a strategy, they're supposed to follow it, but they receive very inconsistent performance feedback, either very negative or very positive, will very much likely to trigger a big interference with their designated path. And BTF, as well as behavioral economics and psychology, apparently has suggested that they are much more, immediate, short-term oriented, and they want to deal with the performance one first. So that will kind of slow them down and change their path a bit on their pursuit of strategy. So we only have three hypotheses. They all find support, and this is our data measure. What I want to highlight is how we measure commitment to strategic goal of market expansion. So we do adopt the typical method of strategic communication research, and they use a lot of text analysis. So we take the strategy and future prospective section of annual report, all months, all years, and we create a keyword dictionary when they talk about everything about the market expansion, and that generates 295 keywords. And we also use a very conventional measure where from each year, we take the keyword counts scaled by the total text length to measure how much details they really disclose when they talk about their strategy. And yeah, this is some examples of how we call the different dimensions. We actually call more dimensions than just market expansion. So contributions. So first of all, we definitely bring strategy to BTF. So apparently that's one of the among the panelists. And second of all, our set of multiple goals are like apples and oranges. I mean, it could be very tough for us to publish, but we know that theoretically, backward-looking performance feedback and forward-looking intelligence are apples and oranges. I mean, they're not the same anyway. And practically, firms do need to deal with apples and oranges all the time, right? And that's why they need garbage can, right? Because the goals and information is all over the place on a daily basis. And finally, someone is brave enough to blame performance feedback as the naughty boy, right? So they interfere with the firm's pursuit of a real long-term strategy that are supposed to follow as well. And I think I can end this talk by, citing the same quote at the beginning. In classic theory organizations, we are inclined to insist on some consistency within a cross-section of goals. Such an insistence seems to us inaccurate as a characteristic of organizational behavior. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Cyndi. All right, Scott.
Hi, give me 1 second to share my slide. All right. Can someone just give me a thumbs up to confirm you're seeing the thing? I hope you're seeing. Excellent. Thanks for that. So I'm going to be presenting some work that builds closely off of a garbage can model of organizational choice. I feel lucky that Stephen Macias sort of introduced this idea as something that is still active in terms of sort of thinking about it, sort of still theoretically productive, but leaves some opportunities for doing sort of future research in terms of sort of pushing the ideas forward. One of the things that's really lovely about the paper, that's sort of the idea of the garbage can model is encapsulated in the very first sentence of the paper. Right? What are organizations? Organizational anarchies. Well, they're organizations characterized by problematic preferences. So the organization can't be characterized as having complete or transitive preferences over outcomes. Unclear technology, decision makers don't know the mapping from strategies to outcomes, or sort of equivalently, they don't have an efficient algorithm for discovering a global optimum, right, even absent of mapping. And then finally, fluid participation. Decision makers' participation in collective decision making fluctuates stochastically over time. And for the large part, the model as it's presented in the originally is intendedly descriptive, but then there's a little Easter egg at the end that Cohen and March and Olson couldn't help but slipping in, which is a positive statement, where they claim, or a normative statement, sorry, where they claim, well, it's clear that garbage can processes don't resolve problems well, but to some extent it can be managed. And in many ways, this is like the most influential sentence, or the second most influential sentence, I suppose, the whole paper. Because when we look at the evolution of work in the garbage can family, or at least on organized anarchy. So a lot of the discussion is about managing garbage can driven dysfunction. And much less so, perhaps the alternative, which is, well, why is it possible that organized anarchies or garbage can decision making might indeed be functional? Now, interestingly, right, immediately after the garbage can is proposed, other sort of scholars in management, so this is a picture of Lupandi, note the potential for garbage can style decision making, organized anarchy, to be functional organizational design. So Pandi and his co-author Moak, I guess is in a book review of the sort of collection of essays about garbage can decision making process, proposed that maybe the garbage can be the organizational equivalent of an all-terrain vehicle. This actually, right, this comes before we even really have a concept of search on rugged landscape. Nevertheless, we sort of have a clear sense of what they're probably talking about in their mind. And then by 1984, Michael Cohen, in some ways, completely reverses himself and says, well, the art of institutional design is to conceive decision-making arrangements that will successfully harness the potential inherent in its strongly held and partially divergent incentives. And in many ways, the theory work related to the garbage can model, sort of, and at least as it relates to the potential for functional organizational design, gets left there. And so the work that I'm presenting, and I'm going to be presenting it sort of at a very high level, is asking about when is it possible for organized anarchy, for sort of garbage can style decision making, to indeed be adaptively rational, to act like this, like Lupandi all-terrain vehicle. And sort of the high level conclusion is that when there's internal conflict of goals and fluid participation decisions, we'll outperform a dictator or an ally of the executive, who wants exactly the same thing the executive wants. In the short term and the long term, not in the medium term, right, in sort of very specific conditions. So for example, when the task environment is rugged, local alternatives are considered serially. And in contrast, sort of dictatorial decision-making, right, decision-making where the authority maintains in the hands of the executive performs better when the task environment is usually searched, or participation in decision-making is static. So we should take a moment to ask sort of why this is surprising, particularly if we take like an economic logic to collective decision-making. Right? Probably the oldest idea in organizational design is that rational bosses should delegate to agents who are allies. So Jonathan Bender, in a review paper of this sort of literature, describes it as ancient political wisdom. It was old before Rome. And yet it shouldn't be that surprising, because when we look around the world at some of our sort of the great institutions or the great organizations of the world today, the Lupandian essay in 1992 posthumously published. Now, I don't know how exactly he counted, but I'm going to probably assume that this is probably still going to be largely the same in 2022. Right, the 66 oldest institutions in Western civilization are basically 4 parliaments and 62 universities. So these are organizations that are fairly well characterized as anarchic, at least in some ways. And so what I'm going to do now quickly is kind of walk you through how I'm sort of reimagining some of these garbage can processes. We talked a little about the ally principle, then I'll sort of give you a sort of a high-level walkthrough of what the model looks like. I'll talk through one set of results, and then give you a metaphor that you can walk away from the presentation with. So why allies? So they're basically, if a principal or an executive delegates to an agent or a committee with non-aligned preferences, well, they're going to do what they want and not what the executive wants. This creates 2 potential problems. So it creates one problem, which in legislative politics we'll call gridlock, or in economics we might call multiple equilibria, which is that participation is static, decisions are made by consensus, then any Pareto optimal outcome is stable. But there's also the problem of a lack of equilibria, especially when actors aren't forward-looking, they're myopic. And if participation is fluid, decisions are made by majority votes, and there's not going to be a stable outcome. You sort of end up with this problem of cycling. And so as a result, right, from the perspective of this view, well, then the ally principle violations aren't about getting better goals, right? Why do we observe ally principle violations? Why do we observe organizations characterized by people with different preferences? Well, then it needs to be justified as a side effect of something else. So maybe diverse knowledge or information or expertise, but not the diversity itself. And so the way this is generally analyzed, at least in political science or political economics, is via these classic spatial bargaining models. So more or less, we can imagine agents with 3 bliss or agents with 4 bliss points, pi 0, 1, 2, and 3. The triangle is your Pareto region. We'll call X some strategy or some outcome, and strategies that are closer to you are more favored than strategies that are further away from you. So decision maker 2 is made very happy by X, they're close together. Decision maker 0 is kind of happy, they're not that far together, but 1 and 3 are made very unhappy. And in the 40-year retrospective book on the garbage can model, and Bender and Schott sort of build on this. Jonathan Bender, sort of well known as the critic of the garbage can model, they build this idea and they basically say, well, let's take this, let's embed a sequential decision-making model into a spatial bargaining logic, and we see what happens. So if we start with sort of, we're going to have a randomly selected status quo, and then we're going to randomly select the unit disk, and then the group is going to make a decision. Depending on how they make the decision, we'll see where we end up after 100 periods. And so if the principal delegates to an ally, sort of in the center of the circle, the outcome is well clustered around the center of the circle. And if they delegate to agents who are at the exterior of the triangle, but they make decisions by consensus, then things are going to get worse. And if we delegate to agents who make decisions by consensus, but not everyone shows up all the time, we have fluid precipitation, it gets even worse. And this is the sort of classic support for the ally principle. So this is the conclusion: better to delegate to allies than non-allies. Right, so for simple task environments, this makes a lot of sense. For simple task environments, smooth task environments, then allies are great. They do exactly what the executive would do. And for us in this room, we would say, but wait a second, task environments aren't simple, right? Let's imagine instead task environments are rugged. Let's instead assume decision makers are boundedly rational. Then that little bit of chaos, right? That chaos that occurs from different people showing up and different people wanting different things will indeed induce adaptively rational search routines. And so this is the basic idea of the extension of kind of these classic models, that problematic preferences are going to lead to desirable exploitation of the status quo is bad. Fluid participation, just problematic preferences of fluid participation are also going to lead to desirable exploration because it permits escape from low quality local optima. And the ruggedness of the task environment itself actually is what buys you the stable outcome, to the extent that there's a common interest in sort of this underlying quality dimension that you're searching, and there's not sufficient disagreement over what desirable outcomes are. And so this is the sort of core hypothesis of the model. Well, better to delegate to garbage cans than allies, at least sometimes. How much time do I have left? Like
not
a minute?
Much. Yes,
All right,
not much.
I'm going to basically walk you all the way to the end. This is right, it's embedded in sort of a classic serial decision-making structure where the strategy, alternatives are generated or assessed, individuals evaluate, collective decisions are made, and then feeds on back. I'll share the paper, you should feel free to look at it. And the question is, when do committees outperform dictators? Right? And once again, the answer is when quality is constant, when participation is static. It's not. When in the short term and long term, when the landscape is rugged and participation is fluid, the long-term benefit is driven by exploitation. The short term is benefited by exploitation, long-term by exploration. And the moderate conflict condition is going to be better than the minimal extreme conflict condition in the short term and the long term. And so basically, what I want you to walk away with is sort of, there's one picture you can walk away with is as follows, right? Oftentimes in organizational design, right, we kind of ask, how do we remove the mess created by garbage cans? And the answer is, well, sometimes we do want a French garbage, but other times we want an English garbage. Sometimes we should kind of harness it for the power of good. All right, so I'll leave it there, and I'll share a link to the paper for anyone else to actually get into the detail. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Scott. That was super interesting, a bit rushed, but very interesting. Okay, so we have a couple of questions here, and I'd like to give the speakers a chance to respond. So Evangelos, if you are here, there are a couple of questions for you, and some of them are in similar theme, asking you to clarify a little bit about the goals, the interdependencies between the two, and are they really sequential, or which is more important than the other, right? So for example, one of the questions is, your goals emerge at different times. For example, the secondary goal is not met, the primary goal will never be checked. This seems more sequential than multi-attributes. Similarly, achieving the primary goal seems to be conditional on achieving the secondary goal. Which one is more important? So if you could just sort of give a quick clarification about
that's a very good point, and we have thought that very, very carefully. First of all, this which I want to mention here is that our analysis is in the portfolio level. So it is not that we check this drug that it is in the let's say in the preclinical phase, what does in one by one to the other phases. So in a portfolio level, you have some projects that are in the phase 2 and phase 3, and in the same time you have other projects that are in preclinical and phase 1. Okay, so these are not somehow individual projects that are connected with each other. Here we speak about a portfolio level analysis. that this sequential thing is not working, because we speak about different projects that are in one area and different projects that are in the other, if you see that in a snapshot in a specific year. Okay, that's my comment. And also about the sequential thing, we have thought about that, and we have done some additional analysis to check what happens if the primary goal is above and the other is below. So we have this sequence that you describe what happens, and we have this analysis done. Yeah, that's a really, really good point.
Evangelos,
did I forget something here, or is something that I have another question?
Yeah, so there was also a couple of questions about the search, the locus of search, right? So for example, why would you just think of locus of search as internal versus external? Can we also sort of think about it as search in relatively familiar with versus less familiar domain? And so could you talk a little bit about how you are conceptualizing and sort of measuring search in your
first of all, this which we wanted to do with this paper is to open up this discussion about locus of search. Of course, there are different ways to measure this locus of search and different things that can be locus of search. I think that external internal is a very dominant one. It comes from innovation literature, which is also based on the data that we had was about that. So this is why we focused on that. But definitely, we actually, as I see it, we would like to encourage that to check the locus of search with different ways. It's not the only one, but I think the external internal is very dominant. What we mean here, external internal, mainly if the drug, the ingredient was the project was that is based in the FDA project. All these projects that we have, they have based on an FDA application. If this application was done from the firm, or the firm came up later on, and came up later on as this the external search. Okay, so they didn't initiate the basic research and everything conducted until they apply for the project. They didn't apply in the beginning for the project.
Thank you, Evangelos. That made it much clearer. Cyndi, one question which a couple of people have asked related to your work is what you call commitment sounds a lot like, Winter's et al.'s 2007 piece where they call obsession, and what Sheen actually yesterday called preemption. So would it be fair to say that firms and people not only react to feedback, but also plan?
Okay, so I think for us, when we conceptualize commitment, right? So it's actually really started from how we try to imagine what would be a forward-looking mechanism to really trigger firms, to drive them. If they are not responding to performance feedback, then what are they really responding to, right? And when they look forward. So yes, so there are actually multiple ways to think about what can drive them into, there's, you can say there's a beliefs, right? Or they are very loyal to whatever plan they make, or they are very focused on what they have communicated to the stakeholders, and they will try to stay very true to that. And so we sort of aggregate them and call them like they're committed, right? So they are definitely gonna do this. So when we write the paper, yeah, so we actually do like use different perspectives to talk about why we think they will commit to these actions, and then how we think about why they when they try to disclose a lot of details, right, as much, and then if you take a lot of portion, why those sort of signals, you can say, right, they signals like they are really very serious about this plan. So yeah, I guess back to Shin's comment, if it's about responding to a future plan, I think you can also say that, because after all, this is strategic goals, right? So this is the long-term objective that they already set, and they are just try to be true to it. But yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Scott, a question for you. Thinking about the paper in the context of your previous work, would you suggest that garbage cans are a solution to either educated inertia or ignorant decision making? You've got to take this question.
Right, very good. That's a very hard question. That's a good question. So I'm gonna give a bit of a non-answer. Right. So it's a lot of my prior work tries to take these sort of classic spatial bargaining models, or at least that paper, and sort of take a fairly pessimistic view, on the potential for preference conflict in organization to be search or learning enhancing, and that was at least sort of sad, or at least you want to also be able to say something good about the potential for multiple goals to produce sort of better organizational outcomes. And so I think the big question in this case is going to be, to the extent that you have fluid participation, to the extent that actors are not forward-looking, then there are these opportunities for search enhancement driven by internal conflicts that I think are very much underappreciated. In the presence of forward-looking actors, in the presence of not sort of multidimensional bargaining, and in the presence of sort of static participation, well, then life gets a little bit harder, and we're probably running into some of the problems that I've explored in the earlier work.
Thank you. That was a great answer. Actually, thank you to all the presenters. That was very interesting work, and I'm sure many of us look forward to reading it more closely. So thank you. And at this point, I would like to actually invite Gautam to say a few words. He got Felipe, Violina, and Stefano and me to organize this winter conference, and he has been supporting us a lot in the background. So I just wanted to, just say a few words before we say goodbyes. Gautam, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Vibha. And thank you to the entire team, Felipe, Vibha, Violina, and Stefano, for a truly outstanding and stimulating 2 days. And also to the incredible audience and participants who have been really fantastic, and we've got an amazing response. So that speaks to the value that organization sciences and the behavioral theory have had in our field. I will keep my remarks very short, just highlight 3 core messages. The first is that the Organization Science Winter Conference is very much alive and will be kicking hopefully in the real world in 2023. The particular design of the conference, which was really meant to engage very close, long interactions rather than just seminar presentations, made it a real challenge to think of it in the Zoom setting. And so I'm very glad that we were able to do this kind of activity, which kind of links the past and the future very nicely. Our plans are very clear. We will be back in 2023, and please look out for the announcement in fall 2022 on the program, etc., and require invitation to submit papers and so on and so forth. The second thing I do want to say to everybody is that because we are now in this online world, for better or for worse, for forever, and especially right now, all the people that are here, it would be wonderful if you were to become more engaged with the organization science community. And there are 3 or 4 basic things that could be done. For instance, subscribing to Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook, our feeds there, which will give you a good sense of what is going on in the journal and new papers, etc. And I would especially encourage you to sign up for the electronic table of contents at the journal website to see all the exciting new papers. So but we can only send emails to you informing you of that if you've signed up in the electronic alerts or electronic table of contents section, which is available from our website, the Organization Science Journal website. And the last thing is we are also hoping to have a physical editorial meeting in August, assuming that things continue on the good trend that they seem to be on finally. And if so, I will look forward to seeing all of you in the editorial review board and annual reception, etc. We'll see how that all plays out, but do keep on the lookout for those announcements as well. And with that, I will thank just the team, the committee, and the participants. Really nothing much else to add. Thank you.